we didn't really bully any other country or pressure any other. I have no problem in terms of, this majority of people who do vote in favor of Palestine because the Palestinian cause is a just one. I'm not really trying to make reference if what's happening in Ukraine is just or not just, but I'm trying really to say that yes, we still, enjoy the support of the majority of countries. But what has happened, in the Ukrainian situation in 10 days have really exposed, the hypocrisy of the international community, the double standard, the exceptionalism that, what is permitted for the Ukrainians is not permitted for others. And when we tried to go to the General Assembly, to the Security Council, to Human Rights Council, to ask for an investigation committee, to go for the ICC, we were asked not to do it. We were pressured not to do it. We even were condemned for doing it. We discovered that in 10 days, crisis in the Ukraine, all the world was repeating exactly what we were denied in doing for 70 years. So this hypocrisy is very, very, clear and open. And I believe that right now it's time for the international community to revisit again the other situations and try to look at it and behave equally. Because what the Foreign Minister of South Africa said is correctly, that the human rights issue, international law is universal and not selective, and you cannot be very selective in dealing with one issue and not dealing with it, regarding other crises.
Thank you, Minister Malki, bemoaning the double standard and hypocrisy that he sees evolving and surrounding the issue. Minister Hussein, we're going to, of course, talk in detail about the day-to-day politics of the Middle East. But still, I want to, because the Ukraine-Russia war is very much at the forefront of the debate. It was here, of course, we had Lavrov and Kuleba here in Antalya a couple of days ago. That double standard and hypocrisy that Minister Malki is bemoaning, do you share that? Your own country has gone through traumatic events, through wars, through invasions. What's your take, if you put it into context?
Yes, thank you very much for having me here.
Perhaps you hold the, no, it was actually on. Please perhaps hold it closer, yes.
As for double standard and being used as a concept in international law and international relationship, in fact, that's part of the reality.
Could I ask you to put the microphone a bit higher up so that the people in the back can hear you?
Is it okay now?
Very good.
Okay.
It's much better.
So it is part of the reality in international relations. It is not acceptable, but it is there. And we have seen it through history and recent history in my country. So putting in the right concept, so some countries, they are using that, even when we talk about human rights. And we are saying that human rights is universal. But we see it as some countries, they are using it selectively. And it has been a tool in international politics or in foreign policy to be used or to be misused against others. This is a fact. And nowadays we use it again. We see it again. So as for Iraq, of course, when we have been asked to vote in the General Assembly in New York a few days ago, we chose a different path. with 35 other countries. Because first, we don't believe in war. Iraqi people have been victims of wars, internal fights, but external wars for about 50 years. So it is a matter of principle, we are against wars. But also, we are thinking that wars and conflicts as such, using violence, will not solve the problem. So that's why we were asking, also in our discussion with Washington, we said the right way is to choose a different path, to stop the war now and to start negotiation. That's the way to solve the problem. So we are seeing this kind of hypocrisy in international politics, but at the same time, we must have an alternative, not only mentioning that, but also offering solutions. And our solution is to stop now the war, let's say to have ceasefire. I'm not talking about who started, why it started, and to stop the war and to start negotiation. And third parties, I think, they can play a role. Third parties, third countries. That's why in Cairo, during the Arab League meeting, there was a suggestion, and we accepted that, to form a contact group from various ministers, various countries, and to contact countries engaged in this conflict, but also other countries, so that we can help together to stop this war and to start negotiations.
So a different approach. Iraq abstained from condemning Russia at the United Nations. You're saying, let's have talks instead rather than condemnation. I think that is the talks is the tricky part to get them started. We saw it here a couple of days ago, but nonetheless, the efforts are certainly being made. Minister Habib, your own country, we know this, is going through a tough time, has been going through a tough time, not only since the big explosion, of course, the tragic explosion we've been seeing in Beirut. Again, coming back to hypocrisy and double standards, do you see, in light of the suffering on the part of many Lebanese for quite some time, do you see an outpour of solidarity out there, or would you have wished that the international community pays much more attention to what is taking place in Lebanon? Give us your opinion.
Well, first let me say about the Middle East. You know, I recall reading the memoirs of President Obama. He says, every time I try to leave the Middle East, something happens, brings me back to it. And that's what the Americans should understand. Now, President Biden, same thing, is that, you know, something would happen to bring him back here. And without having, he has to come without anybody bringing him back here. And I think if the Middle East resolutions or the UN resolutions are adopted and are implemented in this region, there would be no problem. We still, since 1967, 242, 338, and others, and there are also some resolutions that concerning Lebanon. 425, it didn't, I mean, the United Nations did not implement it fully. At the end, the Israelis were forced to withdraw. I think regarding the situation in Lebanon, of course, there are a lot of it has to do with us, Lebanese, but a lot of it also has to do with peace in the Middle East. If you have peace in the Middle East, if 242 is implemented, if the countries stop interfering with in the affairs of other Middle East countries in a negative way, I think we would have no problem in Lebanon. I think the Lebanese people are very lively people. We made Lebanon like a jewel of the Middle East. Now we have difficulty, but we'll go again. There is a little bit of solidarity, but it's more lip service than real work. We need, we have, you know, Iraq is the country, I should allow myself to say it, Mr. Minister, is the one who's helping us. If we don't have the foreign currency to buy the oil, Iraq is supplying us with oil every month so that we can afford giving some hours of electricity. So we have difficulties. We have a lot of lip service and promises to help, but we really are suffering alone. And it's all because of not dealing with the problems of the Middle East.
Thanks so much, Minister. Minister Scheinbeck, you've listened to your counterpart here from Iraq, Palestine, and of course, Lebanon, bemoaning the double standard, the hypocrisy, the lack of attention, perhaps even the lack of knowledge to a certain degree on the part of, for lack of a better term, the West. Now we see an outpouring of solidarity, of show of support, of attention given to the very critical situation in Ukraine. Even in my own profession, you've seen some revealing statements on the part of correspondents, whether it be Sky News, or who were basically saying, well, the refugees, it's pretty odd to see the situation because they're coming from, quote unquote, a civilized nation that is not particularly used to having a refugee situation out there. What would your response be to these three distinguished gentlemen?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me as the only outsider to this group. I believe there might be something of Middle East in Austria too. And you're true, and I just discussed it with Riyadh at length beforehand. And I fully understand this conception of unfairness. We have to acknowledge one thing. There is a difference to a certain degree. War is back in Europe. This is bad news for the whole world. This is an earthquake. A country has attacked another country brutally. And we are in a situation which is extremely dangerous. And it's Austrian neighborhood. It's closer to Vienna, Ukraine, than the westernmost province of Austria. And Austria isn't a big state. We already have over 2 million refugees. So this is a very sensitive situation. And the shock with this earthquake, where I have now tectonic plates moving, the shock waves can be felt all around the world. And Abdallah just said yesterday, when Europe sneezes, the Middle East catches a cold. I sort of, it might be slightly exaggerated, but I like the sentence. But the one thing is clear, from Austrian perspective, yes, the world is not perfect. And yes, we want a system where human rights are universal, where fundamental rights and international law are applied and respected worldwide. Why? Because I'm coming from a country of roughly 9 million inhabitants. We are dependent on export. We're in the center of Europe. We need a rules-based international order. This is our protection. We don't have an atomic bomb. International law is our protective garment. And that's the reason why we react so strongly. Being a neutral country, why we react so strongly, because what we're witnessing is an attack on the European security architecture, on the worldwide security architecture, which we have built up after the Second World War. And even during the times of the Cold War, think of the final act of Helsinki, we did have more channels of communication we have now. That is very bad news, and I'm very thankful to the Turkish government to try to have certain lines of dialogue, and many others are doing the same thing. So the one thing I can warn about, yes, we can be unhappy about the state of affairs in the world, and that rules seem not to apply, and we have a little bit of, you could call it the system of the animal farm. All are equal, but some are more equal than others. This is something which we don't like to see either. We have conflicts, we have Myanmar, we have Yemen, we have Libya, go to Central America, go to other places. And yes, international media is now focused on this very theater. It might move on in a couple of months. You know that better than I do. But it would be a drastic mistake from our side if it drew as a consequence that the system is failed, that the system is wrong. No, I believe we have to stand up now together and fight for this rules-based international system. Because at the end, for Lebanon, for Palestine, or for Iraq, or for Austria, it's the one thing that protects us. So not give up on it, but stand up and fight for it.
Minister Malki, if we're looking now, zooming into the Middle East and into current events. Last year, of course, one of the big stories coming out of the Middle East were the Abraham Accords, where several Gulf nations normalized and stabilized their relationship with Israel. Very much the reaction on the part of Palestinians, understandably, were, of course, one of condemnation, saying you've betrayed our cause, you've left us behind. the whole world, many people were saying this is good for the region, stability is good. But of course, once again, the Palestinian people are saying, well, this is coming at our expense. Now, a few months later, how do you assess the situation?
Well, I think the countries who had high expectations from their normalization with Israel reached a point where they were somehow a little bit disappointed, because they thought that they will get everything they want, and that their life will change, their prospects will change, and that they will live in paradise as a result of it. Well, nothing like that happened. Israel is imposing certain restrictions, conditions, even for their tourists in Dubai airport, where they are putting certain security conditions for people, jeopardizing the sovereignty of the state of the United Arab Emirates to that point. But look, we are part of the Arab League, of the Arab nations. And it was in the Arab Summit in Beirut where they have embraced the Arab Peace Initiative, where it says very clearly that the moment that Israel withdraws from all Arab and Palestinian territories, then we, all the Arabs, will normalize relations with Israel and establish diplomatic relations, etc. So the normalization comes after the withdrawal of the Israeli troops from the Palestinian, Lebanese, and Syrian territory, and not the reverse. If we normalize for free, while still the Israeli forces are occupying the Palestinian and the Arab territories, what will compel then the Israelis, to withdraw their troops later? If we do not put it as a condition now that, we will normalize if you withdraw, then at least the Israelis will think about it, and they might see there is a price that, they have to give away. But, if we will do it for free, without putting any conditions, and we normalize without asking the Israelis to withdraw from the Palestinian and the Arab territories, and not to adhere and to respect what we have agreed upon as Arabs, in the Arab summit back in Beirut 2002, then why we need agreements among ourselves as the Arabs if we are going to violate them and disrespect them. So that's really very important. The Israelis were happy that they started normalizing with the Arabs for free, and they tried to prove to the Arabs that we can normalize with you without even talking about the Palestinian issue. So the Palestinian issue becomes irrelative, when it comes to resolving or normalizing relations between Israel and between the Arabs. This is really incorrect when it comes to the language and the position of most of the Arabs, and the position of the Arab League as it has been for more than 50 years. We are not against the right of each and every individual Arab country, as a sovereign right to normalize a relation or to establish diplomatic relation with whatever country. But when it comes to, first of all, violating, the consensus of all the Arabs, secondly, that will be on the expense of the Palestinians, then obviously we have to say, we have to make a voice, and we have to express our concern, and even to condemn this decision that has been done on the expense of the Palestinian rights and Palestinian people's existence.
Well, I clearly hear the frustration and disappointment is still very much at the forefront here. Normalization of relations, Minister Farouk, is of course also Minister Hussein, is what your country tried to do in a sense. You served as venue of peace talks, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, Qatar, pretty much putting Iraq back on the map after many years of having to rebuild and reestablish itself on the scene. certainly sending out the signal to the rest of the world and Middle Eastern partners. Iraq is back. Iraq is a full player. We are playing our part. But you've had elections last November, and any efforts to form a new government up until now have proven to be unsuccessful. Is that hampering your country's efforts to play a major role in that part of the world, or would you separate those two?
Ali, let me first say something about the first part of your question, which has to do with establishing a platform. We call it Baghdad platform, for having dialogue and discussion among the neighboring countries. Actually, we believe that the security in one country is interlinked with security of the other regions around you or other countries around you. So on the basis of this concept and on the basis of the analysis which we met about the tension, political tension inside Iraqi society, we reached the conclusion that the tension which is internal has got also external dimension and regional dimension. So to manage the tension internally, you need also to mention the, let's say, conflict outside the border. So that's why we started to contact, in this case, the Iranian side and the Gulf countries, and also for a while between some Gulf countries and Turkey, and between the Iranian and Jordan and Egypt. And in a way, we succeeded. We succeeded to bring all these countries together in Baghdad. They were not talking to each other. In fact, some of them, they were in conflict with each other. So we were able to bring them together in Baghdad, and the discussion started. And thanks God, the discussion is now continuing. The talks between the Saudis and the Iranian, they had fourth round of the talks. I think the next one will be on Wednesday, so this week. And we are still in contact with both sides because we believe that to guarantee the security and stability of the region, you need to work together. So we need a regional security, in fact, to guarantee your own national security. And your national security has to do with the regional security. And in this world nowadays, I think gradually there will be blocks in the regions, and they will cooperate together, and they will protect each other. But at the same time, we understand that regional security has got also international dimension. But first, you must have bases inside your region, and Baghdad conference or Baghdad platform is one of them, and we hope that we will continue with Baghdad too within a short time. As for the election, the process of democracy in Iraq is new. So that's why we have got ups and downs in our process. But we are learning. Process of democracy is also a learning process. So we are learning how to deal with the democratic process. And as you know, Iraq was under a dictatorship for about 40 years. So the culture of democracy didn't exist. The democratic elite didn't exist. Actually, we are building it. And we have got many, many political parties. So the election happened 5 months ago. And until this moment, there are discussions within the framework of political parties so that they will reach an agreement. I think it will take time, but we are not the only democratic country which has got difficulties to form a government. In one of the cabinet meetings, I said we are going to copy the example of Belgium or the Netherlands, because in Belgium, they were trying to form their government, and they formed it after 1.5 years. And that's the same with the Dutch government after about a year. So I mentioned that because to say that democracy is new in our society, and the current government is caretaker government, so we are doing the business until we will have a new government, and we will have it. We will have it, I think, within a few months. Thank you very much.
Well, we'll keep watching. That's for certain for news coming out of Baghdad. Minister Habib, the theme now of this round, of course, is normalization of relationships, sometimes for the better, sometimes at the expense of others. Of course, your own country is trying to warm up its relations with Gulf countries. Have things improved since the major spat from last year? Are you seeing improvements? Are you talking to your counterparts? Is there progress?
Yes, you know, like a couple of months ago, we had what we called the Kuwaiti Initiative. His Excellency Ahmed Subah led this initiative, consulted with the Gulf countries, and came to Lebanon, and we responded. And this is a process, and the process takes time to finish. We were, as His Excellency indicated, we were in Cairo a couple of days ago, the three of us, and all Arab foreign ministers, most, not all, were there, and we do talk to each other, we take joint decisions, and we still have, for example, in Saudi Arabia, we have diplomats, and they have diplomats in Lebanon. In UAE, we have diplomats. In every Arab Gulf country, we have diplomats, and they have as well diplomats in our country. So I don't want to say that the relations is warm as it used to be in the past. It is cool, but it is not deteriorating, and we are hoping that with the efforts of the Kuwaiti Initiative, we will restore a lot of the relations that happened. We have problems in Lebanon. These problems cannot, sometimes we cannot solve ourselves, and we need the help of our brethren in the Arab countries to help us solve these problems.
And of course, Minister Schallenberg, we're talking here about mending fences, about trying to repair relationships that were broken, are still broken to a certain extent throughout the past few years in the Middle East. It takes time, it takes a lot of diplomacy, and of course, Foreign Minister Hussein mentioned Iran. Vienna is often the site of the Iran nuclear talks. Interestingly enough, they've gained momentum now that the Ukraine-Russia conflict is in full place, and other countries are looking to diversify their energy portfolio and looking for other sources of oil and gas. Are you hopeful? Are you hopeful that progress can be achieved on that front, on the Iran nuclear front? Do you think that, ironically and tragically perhaps even, that the Russian invasion of Ukraine is accelerating at least some progress on that front?
Well, yes, obviously. I believe it's the nature of foreign ministers, they're always hopeful, even if the situation doesn't look so good. No, I'm hopeful. I believe that what is very important, the Americans and the Iranians, and I had, each time they come to Vienna, I see the delegation leaders, they're very applied, they're really implicated, they're really doing the best to find a deal, and I believe they're very, very close to having it. The problem is, you mentioned now that the conflict, the Ukrainian-Russian war, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, you name a spade, that it accelerated it. The problem is rather to the contrary for the time being, because suddenly we had demands from the Russian side, surprisingly, and I have to say the Russians have been very constructive in these negotiations on the JCPOA, on the nuclear deal with Iran in the last couple of weeks, but now there's a certain question mark. And there were voices coming out of Tehran and Washington asking the Russians to back down. I can simply say I would hope that we strike a deal. Nobody wants an arms race or a nuclear arms race in the Gulf region. This is the last thing we want. And we know that the breakout time for Iran is only a couple of weeks now, until they have enough enriched material to actually assemble a bomb, possibly. So this is something where there's a high urgency. We need a deal. And I have to say one thing, which came out of the friends talking beforehand. We need desperately good messages coming out of the Middle East. And yes, I know that there were voices, but the Abraham Accords were a game changer. And the scarcest commodity in the Middle East, the scarcest commodity in the Middle East is trust. And trust can be destroyed overnight, but it cannot be built up overnight. And I believe if we get a deal on Iran, if we see what happened, the Baghdad summit, I believe was very important. It was local, regional ownership. This is something which is new too. The GCC coming together again in Al-Ula, that we see these kind of movements of local, regional ownership to understand that there's so much foreigners or outside powers can do, be it the US or the United Nations or the UN or the EU, whatever. Trust can only be built by the people. Actually, you have to trust each other at the end of the day. And I believe that is the most important thing, where we can support, we can be at the sidelines, but it is the actors in the region themselves having to do it. And I strongly believe that not only the Abraham Accords, but also the JCPOA could be steps in the long run in this direction.
Trust, certainly the most valuable currency in international affairs. You mentioned outsiders, outside forces that, of course, have always played an integral part in the Middle East, sometimes for better, oftentimes for worse. I'm actually seeing here in the audience, and I hope he doesn't mind, perhaps we can get a microphone if you don't mind. We have Rich Outzen, the former advisor to the US Secretary of State. I want to give you an opportunity. You've been listening to this fascinating discussion. The United States was always a steady fixture in that part of the world. Again, for better or worse, no judgment being made here. It seems, that's my understanding, but correct me if I'm wrong, it seems that the United States is somewhat withdrawing its engagement in the Middle East, that some of the steady relationships that were unshakable up until recently seem to be seeing some cracks. Rich, is my assessment correct?
You're not wrong to think that, because we're consistently saying it, that we're withdrawing from the Middle East. And I associate myself with Minister Abu Habib's comments on that. As President Obama said, every time we try to leave the Middle East, it keeps pulling us back in. It's easy to blame Americans for the mess or the messes in the Middle East, and to some extent that's fair. There were problems before we got deeply involved. But just for a little history lesson, since the end of the Cold War, we've really gone through two phases of US engagement in the Middle East. One was a very hands-on phase in which we tried to fix the problems directly, and I was involved with a number of those. We tried to fix what we saw as the problem in Iraq by overthrowing Saddam after years of blockades or embargoes. We tried to fix problems in Palestine, for instance, by training Palestinian security forces, which is something that I was involved in Ramallah and Jericho to help build capable civil defense and police forces for the Palestinians. We tried to press for two-state negotiations involving Israel and Palestine, which was something I was also involved with at the Department of State. We tried in Afghanistan, and after 8 years or 10 years of trying to fix everything ourselves, hands-on, we realized it was too complex, and we left a mess. We left a mess in Iraq. We left a mess in terms of two-state negotiations. And then we did something worse. We stepped away, and we took a hands-off approach. We took the hands-off approach in Syria, and Syria did not get better. We took a hands-off approach in Libya when we first assisted in the overthrow of Gaddafi, and then we sort of waited to see what happened. We have, in terms of support to negotiations between Palestine and Israel, we've taken a step back from that. And in no case has any of this gotten better. So what I would suggest is have a little sympathy for the Americans, because we've tried it both ways. It was, I think, Winston Churchill who once said, Americans always do the right thing after they try everything else. So what is the right thing in this case? I would suggest that Ukraine represents something of a model to build on. I'm not gonna let my European colleague get off the hook entirely on this. Part of the reason that Americans acted unilaterally is because we had the will and we had the resources, and it was very difficult, frankly, to mobilize European resources for many of these problems that we've been dealing with, not in Iraq, not in Syria, and not as engaged on the two-state process as we would have liked. Now, what makes Ukraine different? I don't think it's racism. I don't think it's because there's a bias against non-Ukrainian problems. I think it's, for once, we have had a coming together of the willpower of the West, and in this case I mean Turkey as much as I do the United States, the United Kingdom, Poland, other countries, to mobilize hard resources to help confront aggression and a wrong that's being conducted by the Russian Federation, and broad-based multilateral support from across Europe, but not just Europe, from Japan and others. This is the first international crisis, maybe of this century, in which we've seen this kind of multilateralism coupled with the real willingness to commit resources. Now, I would suggest in some of the and again, I take very personally the suffering of the Syrian people, of the Palestinian people, the Iraqi people, and the Libyan people. I've been to these places and I've seen the problems. I don't think it's impossible that we can have better at the end of the next 4 or 5 years on many of these conflicts and crises, but it's going to take exactly what we've just seen in Ukraine. Heavy mobilization of resources and broad-based multilateralism. I think the Americans have learned a bit of a lesson over the last 20 years, and I think we're ready for that sort of robust and muscular multilateralism. And what I'm hearing from the distinguished gentleman up here is sort of a rightful critique of what where we are at and how we got there. And I would just hope that there remains some hope that the U.S. can play a leadership role, not a dictatorial role, but a leadership role with this right kind of robust multilateralism and the right partners.
Thank you so much, Rich, for your assessment. Former advisor to the U.S. Secretary of State and right now with the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. This is, of course, I'm looking at Minister Schallenberg. You want to respond directly towards Rich. This is about the Middle East. This is not about the U.S.-EU, but go ahead. Go right ahead.
No, I think this is a very valid point. And I said so in European media, what happened on the 24th of February. And it's rare in history that you spend a night, and I didn't sleep at all basically this night, and you know this is something, a date, which will be in history books. It was the end of you could call it a holiday. 30 years of thinking after the fall of the Berlin Wall, that multilateralism and human rights and so on, which somehow automatically progress and more states will adhere to it. And because we were so convinced that it is right. And now we woke up in a world on the 24th or 25th of February where we realized, oh gosh, no, it's realpolitik again, and it's more confrontational. And I'm impressed, and I'm talking from a neutral country. But we stand 100% together with this, because it's an attack of what makes up our security, what we build up. And I believe that what is happening now, this earthquake, this tectonic shift, will be felt all around, and we will have a fresh look, starting with the immediate neighborhood of Europe. I'm talking about the Western Balkans, I'm talking about Southern Caucasus, I'm talking about Moldova, but obviously also North Africa and the Middle East. This will have repercussions for years and years to come.
The attack, the Russian invasion of Ukraine changed the world as we know it, says Minister Schallenberg. Conflict has again come back to our door, something that those three gentlemen would probably reply to and say, well, welcome to our world. This is what we've been going through for the past few decades. We don't have much time. We have approximately 15 minutes left. We can all read the time. I do want to bring in a couple of voices because obviously this is a subject matter that stirs a lot of emotion. I'm already seeing too many hands, so I can tell you I will try to get some. And who has the microphone? You have the microphone. Why don't you give it to the gentleman? And here's my plea. Otherwise, I will have to interrupt. Please make it a short question because I do want to give other people a chance to chime in. Please introduce yourself.
Sure. Kudret Özersay, the former Foreign Minister of Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. I would like to address my question to Mr. Malki. Mr. Foreign Minister, how do you assess, what is your feeling about the recent rapprochement between Turkey and Israel, particularly the reference to the energy cooperation? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's collect some questions. So perhaps does everybody have something to write? If not, we can get it to you so we'll be more efficient other than going one by one. This gentleman, he has had his hand up. I'm coming to the left side. I'm doing it. Otherwise, I'm going to lose track here. So let's have these gentlemen have their say, and I'm coming now to the left side. Please go ahead. And please keep it short.
Ben Türkçe soracağım.
I would like to ask in English, distinguished Australian foreign ministers and Riyad Malki. My question goes to both of you, distinguished ministers of Austria. Well, actually, for 3 hours, there was a discussion with Putin, and then Olaf Scholz he went to, and then Zelensky. Olaf Scholz actually previously, 4 days ago, he was in Tel Aviv, and in their co-declaration that emphasized that Iran nuclear weapons. And there is this talks going up in Vienna about Iran. Olaf Scholz emphasized that Iran is constructing a centrifuge with a large scale. So, Russia-Ukraine dispute. According to you, is nuclear's weapon intervention and expansion, is it on the table of discussions? And Riyad Malki, this question goes to you. Herzog and Erdogan, Turkey, Israel cooperation in energy. How does the Palestine tackle that? In the Mediterranean region, there are areas whereby Turkey asks for right. So Palestine has undertaken a decision against Turkey in that respect. What would you like to say on about that?
Panel, please keep it short.
Sure.
Thank you.
Dr. Ahmet Oysal from the Orsam Center, its director. We are following the Middle East, and I am wondering how you comment on the Ukrainian crisis, on the food prices, and especially in non-oil countries like Egypt, Tunisia, Morocco, and especially Lebanon. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Very valid question. We have some female voices out here. Do we have some? Please go ahead.
Ben de sorumu Türkçe sormak istiyorum.
I also would like to ask it in English. My question goes to Mr. Hussein. Well, I'm a person who frequently pays a visit to Iraq. You have mentioned democracy. We're just gradually trying to discover it, learn it. So in this respect, sociologically speaking, what kind of instruments do you provide, or else are you thinking of providing in order to accelerate and make this learning process easier in learning about democracy? Thank you so very much. I am from Sakarya University, international relations student. My question is going to be general for all panelists. Middle East countries, why do they try to relate all their problems, conflicts to the United States? What kind of wrongs do they see within themselves concerning their own conflicts and disputes?
Could you introduce yourself quickly?
Yeah, my name is Zeynep Oktav, Professor Dr. Zeynep Oktav, teaching at Medeniyet University. My question goes to His Excellency Hussein, Fuat Hussein. You know, Iraq is moderating the Saudi-Iranian negotiations, and what would you think about the future of these negotiations, and what do you think about the probable impact of Ukrainian crisis or war on these negotiations?
All right, thank you so much. I think a large potpourri of questions that we've been receiving. I know I've been I'm still seeing some hands up there. Unfortunately, we have 10 minutes left, and I do want to give the gentleman ample time to respond to these very broad and multiple questions. Let me start with you, Minister Malki, because indeed, as a current event, Turkey and Israeli relations, we just had President Herzog here in Ankara. We have representatives from the Israeli parliament here at the Antalya Diplomacy Forum suggesting that the relationships between Turkey and Israel are at least moving in the direction of some improvement. What's your take here?
Well, I think, you know, the logic is that Turkey should have normal relations with Israel. This is really the logic. Now, not having normal relations with Israel, meaning that there is a problem. And if there is a problem, then, you know, we have to look into the source of the problem, why there is a problem, and to try to find if the problem has been resolved or we have really overjumped the problem into going back to normalized relations with Israel. Well, Turkey has been very strong in the forefront in support of the rights of the Palestinian people to statehood, and they were condemning Israeli crimes committed against the Palestinian people. They were very clear, very vehement, very strong, very straightforward. And this really is the position of Turkey. I don't believe that going back into normalizing relations with Israel will minimize or reduce the courage and the strength of Turkey to speak up, directly to Israel, to criticize Israel for its really violations of the basic fundamental rights of the Palestinian people. I heard President Erdogan saying that in his press conference, and when I met him last night, he assured me that when they were together, the two of them, he reiterated the position of Turkey strongly in front of the Israeli president. So I don't fear any regression or change in the attitude and the position of Turkey when it comes to normalizing relation with Israel. To the contrary, I do see it as an added value, as a plus, because this will give Turkey possibility to engage with Israel, to convince Israel, to pressure Israel if there is a need, or even to play a role when there is any possibility for any mediation between Israel and between Palestine. So we look at it from a positive perspective and not criticizing it. Now, when it comes to the energy cooperation, here we have to be very careful, because Israel has been taking over our rights in our exclusive economic zone, in the shores of Gaza, in the Mediterranean. And they were exploiting, our gas reserves there. So if Turkey is going to enter into kind of cooperation or partnership with Israel when it comes to energy, Turkey has to be very careful about the source of that gas, if it really comes from Israel exclusive economic zone proper, or if Israel is drilling that gas from the Palestinian economic zone. That's very important for Turkey to take care of, and really to be careful when it reaches such deal with the Israeli side.
But by and large, I understand you're not concerned that thawing of relations between Ankara and Jerusalem will come at the expense of the Palestinian people and the Palestinian cause. For Mr. Hussein, some questions were directed towards you. One in particular saying, yes, you said democracy is relatively new in Iraq. What are some of the steps that could expedite the process, if I understood the question correctly?
In the first place, of course, election is part of the process of democracy. And if you go back to the political history of Iraq, you have seen that the change has been always through violence. Change of the political system in Iraq has been always through the political violence. In fact, when His Holiness the Pope visited Iraq, and there was a ceremony, an event, I saw 6 prime ministers of Iraq sitting next to each other. This is for the first time in Iraqi history that we see the prime minister still in life and they are sitting next to each other. So, as I said, democracy is a process, and through election we are learning, but also through education. Democracy has to do also with education. It's not only election. It must go deep into culture. So we must build a democratic culture. And of course, through democratic culture, we can build a democratic elite. Without having a democratic elite, it will be difficult to lead the democratic process. But we are, to be honest, we are optimistic about that. And the situation in Iraq and the diversity in Iraq is helping us, because the diversity is reflected into politics, and having diverse society, it means at the end multi-political culture, and multi-political culture can also help the democratic process. As for the other question, which had to do with the negotiation or dialogue between the Saudis and the Iranian, I am, once again, this has to do with regional conflict, but it has also to do with what is happening in Vienna. The negotiation about nuclear issue in Vienna, I am fully supporting the agreement, reaching an agreement between Iran and Washington, because the conflict and the tension between Tehran and Washington, it reflects itself on the Iraqi soil. In fact, it reflects itself in Iraqi politics, in Iraqi parliament. So that's why, as I mentioned, that to manage the crisis from behind the border, if there will be an agreement between Tehran and Washington, it will create more stability inside Iraq. So we need that agreement. And as I have been informed by both sides, in fact, they have reached an agreement. They wanted to sign it, but because of Russian position nowadays, it has been delayed. So there is an agreement, in fact, on the table. And of course, the world economy, oil market, it needs Iranian oil also. So the American, they need Iranian oil to be in the market, and Iran can export or increase its share in the oil market for 1.5 million barrel a day. So that will help the international oil market. And we hope that they will reach the agreement and they will announce it soon.
Yeah, and oil prices, of course, is also what leads me to my question to Foreign Minister Habib. It was posed here from the audience, of course. Your country in particular is importing 90% of its cooking oil and wheat from Ukraine and Russia. Add to that the fuel and gas and oil prices, to an already difficult situation to many average Lebanese. Are you concerned? Are you genuinely concerned about food and energy security in your country?
We are more than concerned. We are worried, really, because we are trying to find out where we can get some more, some wheat and some oil and other things, cereals as well. So it is very difficult times for us, especially that the country lacks foreign currency in this time. But let me say something about the Middle East and a question about U.S. involvement.
Yes.
Yes, as long as there is a Palestinian problem, as long as the Palestinians don't have a country of their own, and as long as the world needs oil, the United States would be involved, cannot run away from the Middle East. So these two issues have to be solved before the United States can say, well, I have nothing to do with the Middle East.
But I think absolutely, but I think the question from the young gentleman was also, we've been talking about many of the problems in your country that admittedly have been caused by outsiders, the US, but others as well. But I think the question was also, but where's your share of blame? Pointing towards the Arab and Middle Eastern countries for the difficult situation that you found yourself in throughout the past few years and currently.
Yes, well, you know, United States is a leader in the free world and the world, and therefore a leader has to come up with solutions. Like now they tell us, well, they make démarches, don't do this and don't do that, especially normalizing with Syria. Okay, there are a lot of US conditions on that. Well, if this is the case, then the United States should give us help in order to have solutions for these problems in the United States. And I think it should come now after the Ukraine issue.
Rich, we're almost out of time here, but I can't overlook your somewhat puzzled expression. Please go ahead, 30 seconds.
I agree entirely. The U.S. should, with this part, that the U.S. should remain engaged in helping the Lebanese people and other peoples of the region. Can't just walk away until we get progress on these things. But we can't ignore the role of corruption. We can't ignore the role, particularly in Lebanon, of Iranian interference and IRGC involvement with banking system and things like that. We have some real problems that have to be solved, not just by U.S. action, but by also some local action. And, but I agree, we won't be walking away anytime soon.
Looking at the time, we're almost out of time, but from one outsider to the next, Minister Schallenberg, this is a discussion which usually the Middle Eastern panels I've been on and had the privilege of moderating throughout the past few years were all pretty much gloom and doom, but you can see the silver lining here. I mean, there are problems, there are severe problems, of course, democracy in its infant stages, food and energy security, a Palestinian cause that has still not fully been addressed by the international community. As an outsider, do you see a silver lining? Are you hopeful? Are you hopeful? Do you see signs for optimism that the Middle East is shedding its image, if you will, of a problem-stricken region and become more constructive in the process?
It might be a strange moment in time to say that, but yes, I am. Look at Europe. What have we done? We have experienced, we have been the source of the worst wars ever humankind has seen. And we have managed, look at the European Union. Germany and France at war for centuries. Austrian-Hungarian Empire at war basically with everybody around. We have dismantled empires, we had minority issues, we had everything. And we managed to overcome them within the free world and then to overcome the Iron Curtain and to work together with our partners. It wasn't easy at all. It took us decades, and it will continue. It's like a marriage. It's never a done deal. You have to work on a partnership every single day. And so there is a silver lining, because there's so much in common. And what I said beforehand, there's a growing awareness of, don't blame it on outsiders. Come on, that's ridiculous. Be a man and do it yourself. But the local ownership, the local responsibility is growing, and that's very good. And I believe these are the things, and yes, you need help. We all need help from time to time from outside. But at the end of the day, it's always, as with human beings, it's us who have to bring our act together, and there's definitely a silver lining.
Well, on that positive note, which is not always easy, any session titled Searching for Common Ground in the Middle East, or any session on the Middle East for that matter, to cover all aspects comprehensively and sufficiently within 60 minutes is an impossible task. But I think I speak for all here in the audience when I say that these gentlemen have given us a wonderful, very intricate insight into the challenges, but also perhaps the hopes that the Middle East is harboring and hopefully being able to fulfill its full potential moving forward. Minister Hussein, Minister Habib, Minister Malki, and Minister Schallenberg, thank you so much for your input. This is your applause. Thank you so much.